A retired general fires back after the Obama administration lifts the ban on transgender troops.
There's going to be a conflict for faithful Christians over this issue.
Why he says the new rules will be impossible to reverse. The Attorney General speaks out about the Hillary Clinton email investigation, why she's promising not to interfere. Pro-life and religious freedom advocates suffer a series of setbacks, the impact of this week's court rulings. And war on terror, what it will take to defeat ISIS. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Friday, July 1st, 2016. Good evening and thank you for joining us. I'm Wyatt Goolsby with your News Now. There's more fallout tonight to the Pentagon's decision to lift the ban on transgender troops. We're learning how it could affect the military for years to come. Our Jason Calvi reports tonight from the Pentagon. Jason?
Wyatt, a retired general tells me there's no turning back now. Here at the Pentagon, they're going to be rolling out this plan over the course of the next year. But starting right now, no service member can be kicked out for being transgender.
Can the next president come in and then just get rid of these this order, these changes?
These changes are irreversible, and it's an issue of breaking faith with people that we've told that you can serve openly if you're a transgender or homosexual. The next president can't change that.
General Jerry Boykin commanded the elite Army Delta Force, was a deputy undersecretary of defense, and became a Christian minister. By this November, the military will release plans to train and teach troops about the transgender issue.
Now we're going to have another class that troops are going to have to sit through called transgender inclusion. And that is taking training time that should be used preparing for war.
What is this going to mean for a faithful Christian, faithful Catholic who has obedience to the chain of command and is going through these courses on transgender issues?
There's going to be a conflict for faithful Christians over this issue. But at the end, they're going to do what they're ordered to do because they took an oath to the Constitution.
A year ago, the defense secretary said he wanted to get rid of the ban. And 1 year from today, openly transgender people can enlist.
The Defense Department and the military need to avail ourselves of all talent possible.
This political scientist pushed for the change.
And what today says is that we're a country of inclusiveness, and we don't ban people just because of who they are, and we don't assign people to certain jobs just because of their gender.
But General Boykin says,
we've got to stop and ask ourselves, why are we doing this? How is this helping our military? On the other hand, if it's just an issue of fairness, remember that the enemy is never fair. They don't care. They don't care about how well-versed we are on tolerance.
And military health care may even pay for surgical sex change. Dr. Paul McHugh, he's the former chief of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins University, and he points out that people that have had sex change surgeries see an uptick in suicide by about 20%. He says they have a disorder with dealing with reality. Wyatt?
Jason Calvi reporting from the Pentagon tonight. Thanks, Jason. Now to other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. A hostage standoff in the diplomatic zone of Bangladesh's capital leaves 2 police officers dead and at least a dozen other people injured. At least 9 gunmen stormed a Spanish restaurant popular with foreigners and exchanged gunfire with security. Police believe the hostages include foreign nationals, but the U.S. Embassy doesn't think any of them are Americans. A Chechen terrorist responsible for training Russian militants for ISIS is believed to be the planner of Tuesday's deadly Istanbul airport massacre. The chairman of the House Committee on Homeland Security and Turkish media point the finger at Ahmed Çatayev. They claim he directed 3 suicide bombers who carried out Tuesday's attack. Swedish authorities say he has a criminal record. Çatayev was sentenced to 16 months for smuggling an automatic weapon and 2 handguns into Sweden in 2008. The death toll from the Istanbul attack stands at 44 people, with hundreds more injured. Dr. Sebastian Gorka is a national security expert and the author of the New York Times bestseller, Defeating Jihad, The Winnable War. So Dr. Gorka, point blank, do you believe Istanbul was an attack by ISIS?
If you look at the way it was carried out, the methodology of the attack, if you look at where they were coming from Syria, and the connection to a broader conspiracy, there really are two major suspects. It's Al-Qaeda, or ISIS. The fact that they're coming out of Syria means it's probably actually the Islamic State.
We've been hearing so much about remote attacks outside of both Iraq and Syria. What does the rise in remote attacks tell us about what's going on with the caliphate in Iraq and Syria?
Right, so the caliphate, which was declared 2 years ago by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, has really two fronts in this war. Their priority is to consolidate the territory that they've captured, so Tikrit, Mosul, to prove that they can run a theocratic empire. But beyond that, they have to keep the pressure on the far enemy, the infidel. So that's why we saw the Pledge of Allegiance during the San Bernardino attack, the call to the 911 dispatchers in the Orlando massacre, and that's why you're seeing all these attacks in Brussels, and now it looks like Istanbul. So it's maintaining the empire, but also fighting the infidel on infidel territory.
It's pretty scary when you look at all the number of attacks that they've either inspired or have organized. But you say that this is a war that we can win, that we can defeat jihadi terrorists. What does it take to win?
Just three very simple things, and this is really why I wrote the book, Defeating Jihad. Number one, we have to have true leadership that removes politics, and specifically political correctness, from the threat assessment. None of this censorship, none of this, we can't use the word jihad, we can't say religion is involved. So number one, leadership. Number two, we've got to empower the Muslims of the region who want to defeat the bad guys, the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Emiratis. They have to be the front of this war, but they feel betrayed by the current administration. And lastly, a lesson from the Cold War. This is an ideologically driven enemy. They're totalitarians. They're not communists, they're jihadis. So the ultimate victory won't come from killing all of them. We have to stop people wanting to become jihadis, which means a gargantuan counter-propaganda push to delegitimize their ideology. Those three things together, Wyatt, we could destroy these guys in about a year and a half.
And even so, like I said, it's going to be a tough road no matter how it goes. So thank you so much for your time, and obviously that's important, just highlighting the fact that this is an idea battle that we're trying to win.
Yeah, it's a war of ideas.
Thank you, Dr. Sebastian Gorka. We appreciate it. A challenge for firefighters. Take a look at the wildfire that spread overnight in northern Oregon. It threatened homes and closed a 20-mile stretch of Interstate 84 in the Columbia River Gorge. More wildfires are burning in California, Arizona, Idaho, and Montana. Attorney General Loretta Lynch admits her meeting with President Bill Clinton was a mistake. She says it was an unexpected social visit, but it left a poor public perception since the Justice Department is still investigating Hillary Clinton's private email server.
I certainly wouldn't do it again. Because I think it has cast this shadow over what it should not, over what it will not touch.
Lynch promises to follow whatever recommendations come from the investigation, even if it includes criminal charges. Sarah Westwood is a watchdog reporter for the Washington Examiner. Sarah, is Loretta Lynch's statement today simply a response to her airport meeting with Bill Clinton this week?
That's exactly what we should see it as. She had no intention of announcing anything about the Clinton email probe before there was such a severe backlash to that meeting. Basically, she's just telegraphing that she's not going to let political bias get in the way because suspicions are high now that she's had this private meeting with Bill Clinton.
So were you surprised by anything in this announcement? Anything that you see as a significant update?
No, I think actually Loretta Lynch just announced that she's doing what she's by law compelled to do, which is not allow her political biases get in the way of ruling on the FBI's recommendation for an indictment. And it's something that she should have been doing in the first place, but she just sort of needed to come out in front of the public and assure them that this is how the case is going to proceed, because she's showing that she's responsive to the public outcry.
You know, also this week, the Benghazi Committee released, investigated their findings. It's something like an 800-page report. What are some of the biggest discoveries in that, big highlights?
The biggest discovery to me was the complete lack of a military response to Benghazi. You know, the administration has consistently given the impression that they did everything they could to rescue the Americans under siege in Benghazi. But once we read this report, we learned that was actually not true. The first forces did not depart for Libya until 24 hours after the violence had ended, and the Pentagon didn't really lift a finger to help the Americans. So that, to me, showed a disconnect between the statements and the reality of what happened.
So after looking through all this, are there any questions left unanswered in this report?
There certainly are. I mean, we don't know what the CIA was really doing in Benghazi in the first place. You know, there have been questions, more conspiracy theories, according to the Democrats, that there was some activity related to weapons taking place in Benghazi. We don't know that, and we still don't know why, if Defense Secretary Leon Panetta gave the dispatch order to assets in Europe, why didn't they take off? I mean, what was the holdup? And that question was never fully answered.
It really is interesting the more you delve into this, because like I said, that 800-page report is pretty extensive. And all of this is really interesting, not just to see what's going to happen with this investigation, but also how's this played out in the political season. Sarah Westwood with the Washington Examiner, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
And Donald Trump begins vetting prospective vice presidential picks. Sources say Chris Christie and Newt Gingrich are on his short list. The New Jersey governor and the former House Speaker reportedly received vetting paperwork in the last 24 hours, even though Christie's image has been hampered by the so-called Bridgegate scandal, and Gingrich has been criticized for a series of marital issues. Another setback for religious freedom advocates. A federal judge blocks a Mississippi law which would have protected clerks who object to issuing non-traditional marriage licenses. The judge says the law would have created unequal treatment for gay people. Governor Phil Bryant says he's disappointed by the ruling and says the state will appeal. Pro-life advocates also face a setback. A federal judge blocked Florida's new abortion law. It would have blocked the state's government funding of Planned Parenthood and increased inspection requirements for abortion clinics. Another provision of the law was allowed to stand. It redefines pregnancy trimesters, which could cut the time when abortions are allowed. The number of abortions in Texas fell 15% this year after the state implemented tougher safety regulations at abortion clinics, but the Supreme Court sided with abortion advocates this week and reversed the safety regulations. Kristen Hawkins is the president of Students for Life. She joins us via Skype from St. Paul, Minnesota. Kristen, it feels like a bad week for pro-lifers. What do you make of all of it?
Well, certainly the Supreme Court decision this week was devastating for those of us who fight to end abortion in our country. And we know what it's going to mean. We know more children are going to end up dying from abortion, and we know more women are actually going to end up dying from abortion. But, you know, it's not all is lost. When we were looking at, you know, all the young people that came out to join us at the Supreme Court this week, we couldn't help but think, you know, we might have lost the 80-year-olds in black robes crowd, but we're certainly winning with this generation.
This week, a federal judge blocked an Indiana law banning abortions on babies with Down syndrome or other genetic abnormalities. Why is a law like that so important?
Well, I think it's, you know, these are very common sense laws. When you ask people why they think abortion should be illegal or legal, a lot of people will say that, of course, you shouldn't be choosing abortion. Abortion shouldn't be legal just because of the genetic makeup of the child. And so these are really, you know, common sense laws. And I think they show the callousness of the abortion industry when they go to the bat and they fight and they press these lawsuits against these pieces of legislation. You know, I have two children that were born with genetic disabilities, Gunnar and Gracie. So these laws are very personal to me. And it really just shows really what's their bottom line there.
You seem to have a very optimistic attitude. Why are you so optimistic about the future and of the future of the pro-life movement?
Well, as I said, this generation's pro-life. You know, when we talk about transforming culture, when we talk about transforming Washington, D.C., that always happens with young people. Young people drive culture. Culture drives politics. We're not going to transform Washington, D.C. and those who sit on the Supreme Court until we make sure this generation is not only pro-life, but they're willing to fight for the end of legal abortion. And that's why, you know, Monday was this awful defeat. But then I looked out and I looked at all the students who had given up over a week of their time to be there with us, who were dedicated to fighting to end abortion in our lifetime. And I looked at the other side, and the people they had bussed in were asking our students questions of what are we here for? What's this law about? I know the momentum is on our side. The momentum is with this pro-life generation. We can do this.
And whether it's out and about in Washington, D.C. at pro-life events or via Skype here from Minnesota, Kristen Hawkins, we really appreciate your talking to us. Kristen Hawkins with Students for Life. Thanks.
Thank you.
Coming up, Papal Prayer Request, why Pope Francis wants us to remember people on the margins of society. And a global icon gets a facelift, what they're doing to improve the Roman Coliseum. Today we celebrate St. Junipero Serra's feast day. The Franciscan priest was the founder of California's first missions and is said to have baptized more than 6,000 people. Pope Francis canonized Serra during his U.S. visit last September, making it the first canonization performed on U.S. soil. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. Pope Francis releases his monthly prayer intentions after a busy week at the Vatican. Edward Penton is the Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register. Ed, what is the Pope's message about indigenous peoples?
This is something very close to the Pope's heart. It's about showing respect for indigenous peoples. And it's something he's raised many times in the past, particularly last year on his trip to Bolivia, because indigenous peoples around the world are suffering from violence, from poverty, from addiction, and he wants really to draw attention to that and give them their due respect.
I also understand he met with the mayor of Rome today. What did the two discuss?
Yes, the new mayor of Rome, she's the youngest person to become mayor of Rome. She's also the first woman to become mayor. She's only 37, Virginia Raggi is her name, and she belongs to a protest party which is very much in favor of the poor and combating corruption. And so she was talking with the Pope today about helping the poor in Rome, who she calls the forgotten people. And in fact, she brought a tablet with her to show various messages from the poor of Rome to send to the Pope.
You know, it always seems like the Holy Father has so much on his docket, so much on his schedule. Ed, what's next for Pope Francis this summer?
Right, yes, well, all the audiences, general audiences have been cancelled. He's no longer giving morning homilies every day. And he generally just sort of sits back a bit. He doesn't go anywhere. He prefers to stay at home, as it were, and takes stay vacations, as they call them, and he wants to just sort of relax and read. And this has been his general way of going about holidays, even back in Buenos Aires.
And it's much deserved. Like I said, we know Pope Francis meets with so many people and travels so often. This week we saw Pope Francis and Pope Emeritus Benedict together. You wrote an article about an upcoming book on Pope Emeritus Benedict. What are some of the themes? Yeah,
this is going to be about the highlights of Pope Benedict's life, and he's going to look back at the highlights, the highs and lows, both of his life and of his pontificate. And he's also going to discuss what he calls the painful decision to resign, and he's also going to put to bed, as it were, the accusations that he might have resigned because of certain alleged blackmail. So he's going to clear all that up and also discuss differences between him and Pope Francis, and generally, I think, just discuss a sort of autobiographical interview in this forthcoming book.
Well, I know it's so interesting to a lot of Catholics to learn more about Pope Emeritus Benedict, and obviously Pope Francis has talked about how he supports all the prayers that Pope Benedict prays for him. Edward Penton with the National Catholic Register, thanks so much for talking with us.
Thanks, Matt.
The ancient Roman Coliseum now sparkles again in the sunlight. The Italian Prime Minister says the first stage of the arena's restoration work is complete. The multi-million-dollar project is the most extensive in the Coliseum's history. Workers have been removing soot and grime built up from decades of pollution. The next step is to replace the arena's floor with one that could support modern-day entertainment and cultural events. The goal is to have it done within 2 years. Up next, coping with dysfunctional families and cynical politics. Bishop Robert Barron talks about the themes of his new book. And preventing the Zika virus, the ongoing political fight over health care.
Faith is not a quarter that you put in some machine and get what you want. Faith is a total trust in God.
Timeless wisdom from our foundress, Mother Mary Angelica. Mother Angelica went to be with the Lord on Easter Sunday. We're happy to know she's praying for all of us to grow in our faith from above. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. President Obama speaks out about the ongoing political fight over the Zika virus. Legislators have been struggling to compromise on a spending bill.
This is just common sense, and this is not the time to play politics.
Obama believes researchers could quickly develop a Zika vaccine if Congress provides the funding. Republicans say Democrats rejected the bill because it didn't have money designated for Planned Parenthood to pass out birth control. Bishop Robert Barron releases a new book covering everything from politics to dysfunctional families. Lauren Ashburn recently interviewed him during his trip to Rome.
Bishop Robert Barron is the founder of Word on Fire Catholic Ministries. He's an auxiliary bishop at the Archdiocese of Los Angeles and recently released a book, Vibrant Paradoxes of the Catholic Church. Welcome to the program.
Good to be on with you. Thanks for having me.
Why were you inspired to write this book, Bishop?
Well, you know what's behind this book is G.K. Chesterton, who saw paradox as essential to the Catholic vision. We are the great both and religion, not either or. And taking that Chestertonian starting point, you just see it everywhere. The church is this and that. It tends not to move in the dialectical direction of either or, but the synthetic direction of both and. And so then you see it all over the place. And so the book is a series of essays, but they all roughly have to do with this coming together of opposites.
The one thing I'm very interested in as the political director is the section called Seeing Political Corruption with Biblical Eyes. And you say you should not allow suspicions to give way to complete cynicism regarding politics. And in this election year, that's hard to do. You also say never put total trust in political systems or leaders. So how should biblically minded people approach politics?
Carefully, warily, and with a sense of realism. The Bible is, as you suggest there, very suspicious of political power. And go back to all the great stories, especially in the Old Testament. The suspicion of kings and the way they abuse their power, long before the 18th century revolutions in Europe and in our country, the Bible is well aware of how power corrupts. And so we look at our political leaders with a certain wariness. Now, it doesn't mean we get cynical about it. It doesn't mean you leave politics aside. It means you look at it carefully. Look how the Old Testament lionizes kings, and I mean that very positively. Someone like David. At the same time, it emphasizes David's flaws and sins. It holds up kingship as a great ideal, and it's extremely suspicious of kings. I love that both and when it comes to politics.
I agree with you. And also when it comes to families, another section that touched me. You said that God pushed himself into a dysfunctional family. Some were murderers and adulterers, and like them, we are flawed. Now, what is the message you're trying to send here?
Oh, it's that wonderful message we get in the genealogies in the Gospels. So, you know, we'll read those at Mass sometimes. People say, yeah, blah, 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 all these funny names from the past. But those are wonderful things because they're showing you many of the heroes of Israel, indeed, great figures, and far more suspicious characters who find their way into the genealogy of Jesus. God enters into the dysfunctional family of the human race. If we say that Mary's the mother of God, indeed that's right, and that means that God had a grandmother, God had a great-great-great-grandfather, God had peculiar uncles and weird cousins like the rest of us.
Who come to dinner?
God enters into the sort of messy dysfunction, the messy dysfunction of the human condition. And that's part of the beauty of the incarnation. Now, that's a very Franciscan, meaning Pope Francis kind of theme, isn't it? God gets the smell of the sheep, too.
Bishop Robert Barron, thank you for joining us. His book is Vibrant Paradoxes of the Catholic Church.
A big lottery jackpot is up for grabs tonight. The Mega Millions prize has grown to $415 million. That makes it the 10th largest jackpot in U.S. history. Mega Millions is played in all but 7 states. Tickets cost $1, which is half the price of Powerball. And we thank you for watching EWTN News Nightly. For the entire news team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. Brian Patrick will be back here on the anchor desk Monday. Be sure to join us then for an Independence Day special. Good night and God bless.